Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Sir Spam 28 here. Welcome to Islands of Ice. We're continuing our map tactics series with this mid to high tier, very snowy and icy map. This is a large map with lots of room, and it features mostly the domination game mode, but I have also seen encounter on this map as well. The quirky thing about domination on Islands of Ice is, as you can see, there are 4 cap points instead of the usual 3, which makes it a little bit more interesting as far as tactical considerations go. The other main quirk on this map is the spawns. The spawns are actually split. There is a spawn in the top right and bottom left corners, but those spawns are subdivided into a north area, which I will put here, which you can see that in this match these ships had spawned in, and a south area, which will be over here. And then on the enemy side, or in this case the south side, there will be a north spawn area over here, and a south spawn area over here. Now, what's interesting about these spawns is that the battleships, at least, again, so far in my experience, and I've played a lot of matches on this map, the battleships will always spawn in these southern areas. Always. So, these are the BB zones. Battleships will not spawn in the north area. However, any other ship can spawn in any of these areas, and indeed, you will often have spawning along with the battleships at least some cruisers and destroyers. And then the remaining of your team's cruisers, destroyers, and carriers will spawn in the northern zones. So, this makes it interesting and gives you your first choice, and indeed my first tip on this map. If you find yourself in the southern half of the northern spawn area for your team, and you are a cruiser, and by looking at the enemy team list you ascertain that you are going to need to provide air support, you want to start steaming south as soon as possible to meet up with your BBs and provide them that aircraft screen. So that would be the first tip for this map. The nature of the split spawns means that you have to make a decision right away if you find yourself in a cruiser in the northern area. Now, this map is very large, and like I said, it contains 4 points. A lot of players find this a little bit intimidating when they first get into this map, because not only is it probably the largest map that they've seen so far, if they're jumping in, getting in a tier 6 or a tier 7, or even a tier 5 Congo can see this map, and they, it's big. There's a lot of points to cover. They don't know what to do. I have found that the easiest way to manage this map is to actually create several smaller maps out of it. And that's going to be my second tip on this map, and I'm going to go ahead and use our trusty purple color here. You want to subdivide this map into sub-zones. That gives you a little bit more clarity and focus on where you should be putting your ship. So I'm going to go ahead and draw the zones that I like to use in. You might have a different way of subdividing it, but this is what I have found kind of works for me. So you kind of just want to follow the natural contours of the islands to create your zones. And what you'll end up having when we get done with this is 5 distinct zones that you can concentrate on. You'll see that there's a middle zone here that contains B and C cap points. There's the A zone down here in the bottom right hand corner. There's the D zone in the upper left hand corner. And then the remaining 2 zones in the upper right and bottom left hand corners respectively are the spawn area zones that feature all the open water. So, let's talk about where you should be focusing as a team first and foremost. Looking at this map and these zones that we have created for ourselves, the obvious choice to put most of your firepower is going to be the central zone. There's 2 main reasons for that. The first being, the central zone is the only zone on the map that contains 2 objectives, which means you get more bang for your buck if you are contesting the central zone. You can influence 2 main objectives instead of just a single main objective, which is always a good choice. The second major feature is that the middle zone is just that, in the middle of the map, which means this is really kind of the gateway zone to get to any other zone. It borders all of them, which means this is the most tactically flexible area of the map for you to be on. From here, you can get to D if you need to, you can get to A if you need to, you can flex back to your spawn if you need to protect your carriers, or you can cut straight through in kind of an inside-out flanking route and get into their spawn areas to harass their remaining ships. So, that is what I would recommend. The next tip on this map would be make sure that this is your first priority area. What does that look like, and how do you make it your first priority area? I'm glad you asked. So, let's go through the scenarios for the actual ship classes. We already kind of covered that on the conditional, if you're a cruiser in the northern spawn zone and you need to provide air cover, you need to come down to provide screening cover for your BBs. But battleships, what should you be doing? Since you're always going to spawn in the southern spawn areas, and this is your first priority, you should probably cut in and then start shading along the outside. And same thing for this zone, cut in and start shading along the outside. What this is going to allow you to do is provide long-range fire into the enemy battleships across this entire zone. And you can play with, the islands kind of in between to block off line of sight if you need to. And you can, this is just a rough guideline. You can obviously kind of maneuver, in any of this area that you need to. And same thing on this side. This whole kind of area along the outside of the one zone is your playground to be maneuvering in, positioning yourself to get good shots on the enemy and keep yourself safe. Obviously, cruisers, if you're screening your battleships from the aircraft threat, you're going to be steaming right along with them, kind of doing the same thing. And that also gives you the added benefit of when you're, again, along these lines, you can be putting shots in on any ships that are in the B and the C cap. Destroyers that spawn in the bottom spawn area, I would actually go ahead and recommend to shoot into A. And this is going to be your second priority area, is the A cap, because it is a little more tactically flexible than the D cap, and we'll get into that when we talk about the D area later. This is obviously a destroyer playground. There are so many islands, so many routes, so many chokes that smoke can fully block off, so many ways to get flanks on any ship in any position in this area. Destroyers are really the only ones that have a good time down here. If you're in a battleship and you go into this area, you're gone. You're dead. A destroyer that has any sort of brains should be able to get the jump on you and get full torpedo salvos into you at almost point-blank range. Same thing with a heavy cruiser. This area is really difficult to maneuver around in. If you're in a light cruiser, you can attempt it, but I wouldn't recommend it unless you have a healthy destroyer screen in front of you that has scouted out and kind of secured the area. Then you can follow up if you need to. But I would recommend, if you're a cruiser and you don't need to be providing that aircraft screen and you're in the southern spawn, then yeah, go ahead and back up your destroyers by coming this way, shading along this side, and then joining the rest of your team and cruising up here. And what that allows you to do is, at the beginning stages of the game, is just add a little bit of extra firepower oomph into the A cap to back up your destroyers that are battling out with the enemy destroyers over possession of the A cap. And then you go ahead and support your main force by securing B and then working your way up towards C and securing C as well. Cruisers, being more tactically flexible than battleships, of course, do not have to stick to the outside rim like a battleship should be doing to stay safe. If you've got destroyers that are kind of already in these caps and, again, scouted out the area, or indeed your carrier has planes that are zooming around the area and scouting it out, cruisers from both caps can come in and obviously kind of take a more inside route like this or like this and be a little bit closer to the caps. And indeed, if you need to, if you see the opportunity, you can always come straight through like this. Again, assuming that your destroyers have beat you to this area and have screened it off, then you can get in and get to the B area and put pressure on that, and then kind of reverse course and come up and pressure the C area. Cruisers have a little bit more tactical flexibility. They don't always have to stick to the outside. Now, destroyers in the north cap, you want to go ahead and split it in half. And if you're on the northern half of the north spawn point, go ahead and get into D, as D is going to be the third priority area. So just a couple of destroyers is really all you're going to need in this area at the beginning of the game to just kind of scout it to see what the enemy is actually putting up here. And then if you are uncontested, you can go ahead and start capping it. And The quirky thing about D is that it's also a bigger cap zone than the others, and given the large size of this map, as a destroyer, I'll actually put the 3 back in there, you can actually be like right in here and set your smoke, and you're going to be pretty invisible until ships really get on top of you, which will allow you, A, to do a lot of good scouting, and B, to probably almost cap this zone. If, you know, the ships are kind of staying out of the zone, staying off, you can get invisible and start capping and put pressure on them right away. If you're a destroyer that finds yourself in the bottom half of this northern spawn point area, then go ahead and start zooming in to both B and C and starting to put fast cap pressure in the main section of the map. What that will do is, if you can be successful with the cap, it'll give your team a pretty nice points lead, and it just, by zooming forward in front of the rest of your team, will get that scouting information off to see how the enemy team is deploying around the central portion of the map. You can also, by zooming ahead, take advantage of all the islands that are in this central portion. So if the enemy is making a boneheaded maneuver and sending a battleship or a cruiser first without any destroyer screen through these channel island areas, you can set up your torpedo salvos and get point-blank ambush torpedoes off onto those bigger ships. So that's a pretty good deal as well. Last but not least, the carriers are, I think, always going to spawn in the northern spawn point as well. But like we talked about, with D being the 3rd priority on your team, you should probably want to start shading south, and then see again, you know, how your team is doing. This map is big enough that you definitely want to start following your team in if they are breaking through and making a push, just to reduce that flight time, because the map, again, is large, and the flight time, if you're staying way in the back here, is going to be astronomically huge to get your planes into the action and then back to reload. So, some general tactics on this map, now that we've covered kind of the classes. Like I said, you want to definitely contest the middle area first. This is, again, your #1 priority. So get the bulk of your forces with your BBs on the outside, your cruisers screening them or even cutting in a little bit to provide fire, and your destroyers duking it out early in the middle. Get this area secured and clear of enemies. Your destroyers in the southern spawn areas should be contesting A, and hopefully maybe with a cruiser or 2 backing them up along the outside edge to get A as your 2nd priority. And then again, D, you should only really at the beginning of the game be committing a few destroyers into the D area just to scout it out, and then if you get lucky, cap it uncontested, or if the enemy has kind of mirrored you and it's just a couple of destroyers on a couple of destroyers, depending on the destroyer you're in. If you're in a Japanese destroyer, you know, use your stealth. Obviously, try to get the stealth cap with your smoke, but if it's not working, you can just shoot some speculative torpedoes and then just get right over here and run away. Even use kind of these islands for cover and get back and stay in this area to launch your long-range torpedoes into C and into B. Don't worry about it. If the enemy team is committing a lot of forces up to D, then the way that you counter that is just, again, zoom in, take C, take B easily if they're committing a lot of their forces to D, and then you actually can kind of pincer them in from the middle. You've got multiple routes. From the middle point, you can come this way and get a pincer, or you can do a longer pincer like that and get a pincer. But look to do that, and then you should be able to encircle and destroy them if they corner themselves in this area. Battleships, once you steam in this direction, and if you've made it all the way past here, and the middle's not resolved yet, and, you know, the enemy battleships have made it all the way past here, or maybe they've even, you know, cut in on this island like this, just to provide a little bit more direct fire. I see that a lot, and same thing with these southern battleships. We'll go like this, and then cut in through this channel, and get to here. So this is pretty close range engagement for battleships. But if this central area still isn't resolved, do not shoot through these channels into D, because what that's going to do is kind of like the 10 line on north in our previous map tactics video. Once you're behind this big island, then you've lost the ability to influence the rest of the map, and you've locked yourself into just fighting over the D point, which means that, say, you know, this southern battleship force, they got to that point and they decided to keep steaming through, but this battleship force didn't, and they turned this way. Now they're obviously going to have more firepower on the B and C side while you're stuck behind this giant island trying to get through here to start engaging them, or taking a long time to turn around and cut back through here to try to engage them. So you definitely don't want to get up into the D area until C and B are secured, and to a lesser extent A. Now, let's talk about what happens if the enemy commits to A. Again, you steam in to C and B and take that, and then hopefully your Vanguard force in D can take that as well. If you need to, you can send a ship or two up to help them. You know, if your force goes in here, the enemy force goes over here. You've got C and B pretty uncontested. You can obviously just shoot through this gap, and then you've got, you know, 2 angles of attack on the forces they have in D. But let's say the bulk of the enemy forces have gone into A, and they've capped A, and they're steaming through this way. Well, the way you counter that is simply by taking B and C and then getting D. You can set up your defensive perimeter along this back half right here and just prevent them when they're in the open water from getting into B and C and D. And as this is a domination game mode, by having 3 points to 1 point, you should be ahead on the points ticker. First to 1,000 wins, or if the timer goes down, most points wins. So that's not a bad deal at all. And this also kind of gives you the advantage. If they're in the open water where your spawn used to be, and you were tucked away in here, you have all the cover, you have the concealment. Your destroyers can, after they've come into B and C, can swing back around and set up in these islands. So if the enemy is in this open water area down here, and they want to shoot through to start contesting B and C, they have to go through narrow passageways where you can really concentrate your firepower, limit their room to maneuver, and if you have destroyers or cruisers with torpedoes left, really give it to them as well. So that's the main priority on Islands of Ice. Definitely control the center, and you should control the game. That's going to be it for this video. Again, main things to go over: subdivide this big map into 5 smaller areas, and then look to control the center. And try to make sure that you're playing your ship to its strengths. So if you're in a big BB, stay on the outside, shoot across, provide fire support. Don't be a hero and go into narrow island areas, and try not to get yourself in this back corner where these big islands can block you off from shooting at the rest of the map. And if you're a destroyer, on any domination map, make sure that you're going in and fast capping and putting pressure on the enemy, which will draw them into the cap areas. Instead of, you know, let's say the whole enemy team is going on an end-around flank like this. I don't think it would ever happen, but somehow it happened. They're all lemon training in one direction. Even the BBs and the destroyers and the cruisers from the southern area have met up with these guys, and they're all going this way. Well, by your destroyers getting into the caps super fast, you're, in this scenario, A, going to cap them, and B, it's going to put pressure on the enemy team. So if their original idea was to end around flank like this, by the time they get this done, you're going to be at 700-800 points from these 3 caps. So what you're going to end up doing is actually causing them to go like this and starting to contest these caps, and now you've actually got your engagement on your hands instead of being surprised by a giant flank. So that's going to be it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. This is a little bit longer than the last one, but this map is a little bit more complex than North was, so it warranted talking about a little bit more. One final tip, I guess, is some of these islands are pretty buggy on this map, so you might have issues running into invisible walls or your shells exploding on invisible walls. So just give these islands a little bit wider berth than you normally might think about giving them. And if your collision warning indicator is going off and you don't see anything in front of you, it probably means you're about to run into an invisible wall, so you should be maneuvering away from the island anyway. That's going to be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, or just want to talk about anything in general, please feel free to leave a comment, and I will see you next time.